Let's see how to build a visually editable navbar that shows up on every one of your pages using Next.js and Makeswift. Let's start by creating a brand new site inside of Makeswift. We'll do this by starting inside of the builder. And in this case, we don't want a template, so we can just skip that and move forward. Now, since we didn't use a template, we don't have any pages created for us. So let's go ahead and create a home page. So we'll start by creating a blank page. We'll then rename this to be home and then update the path to be the root index route. To be able to create and test our Navbar component, we need to connect Makeswift to our locally running Next.js project. To do this, we'll actually start inside of Makeswift. So we'll start by opening up our settings, and then we'll need to go to the host tab, and we'll need to update the host URL to be localhost 3000, which is what our local Next.js project runs at default. And then we'll need to copy our API key to be used in a second. Now we can add the API key to our local project and run it. Back in VS Code, you'll need to create a .env.local file if you don't already have one. Then we can add the environment variable for Makeswift API key and paste in our API key that we just copied. Next, we can start our application by running the command npm run dev in the terminal. Let's start to work on our code. The first thing we need to do is create a basic React component for our navbar. We can start by creating a new components directory inside of the source directory. And then inside of that, we'll also add a directory for our navbar. And then inside of the new navbar component, we'll create a new file called index.tsx to represent our React component. Now, the focus of this video is not on building this component per se, so I'm just going to paste this in, but we can see we have some pretty basic things here with some prop types that you would expect, including a class name, which we'll talk about in a minute. We have a logo, and then we have an array of links, which each have a label, which is a string, and then a link, which is an object that includes an href property. And then a basic navbar using Tailwind CSS that also uses the Next.js image component to display a logo in the top left of the navbar. Here's what this will look like in the end. Now we need to register this component with Makeswift and allow certain properties to be editable inside of the visual builder. To do this, we'll need to create a registration file, which we'll call navbar.makeswift.tsx. Note that the .makeswift.tsx is just a convention that we use, but it isn't a requirement. Now, I'll go ahead and paste in the registration file since, again, this isn't the focus of the video. We'll walk through this file together, but in general, we need to use Makeswift controls to define properties that map one-to-one with the properties of our React component. If you'd like to see a more hands-on approach to registering components with Makeswift, you can check out this other video. A couple of things to note here. We've defined a navbar component type variable, which we'll reference below. Then we define the logo props using the group control, allowing us to define properties for source, alt, width, and height. We also define the links prop, which uses the list control, and define each link to have a label using the text input control and a link using the link control. Lastly, we call runtime.register component and pass the navbar React component as well as a config object to define our component. We use the navbar component type variable we defined above as our type property, which is basically a unique identifier. Then we use navbar as the label. Here, we're also setting the hidden prop to be true since we don't want this component to show up in the component tray. This is because we want to have this component show up on each page and control that from code only. This is not meant to be a visually draggable and droppable component. Lastly, we set the props object to include our logo, links, and we add a class name prop using the style control. Now, for each component that we register with Makeswift, we also need to import it into the components.tsx file. So I'll go ahead and open the components file up, and then we'll just import the navbar registration file here to make sure that it's picked up by Makeswift. We want our navbar to show up on each page inside of our site. In Next.js, the best place to do that is inside of the root layout.tsx file. Inside of that file, we can use the MakeswiftComponent API to render a snapshot of our navbar just above the children in the layout. We'll first have to query a snapshot of our navbar by calling client.getComponentSnapshot. We'll make sure to import the client from the Makeswift directory at the top. We'll need to pass in an ID for this snapshot and a configuration object, which will include the site version. We can get this by calling the getSiteVersion function and awaiting the results. And we'll make sure to import getSiteVersion from Makeswift runtime next server at the top. Then we can render the snapshot inside of the layout by using Makeswift component. We'll make sure to import this from the Makeswift runtime. As you can see the import above. And then we can pass it the snapshot we just queried, a label, and a type. We'll reuse the type we define in the registration file and make sure to import it at the top as well. Then we can add the closing tag for the Makeswift component, and we'll make sure to save our changes. Now let's take a look inside of Makeswift and see how this shows up. We can see that the navbar is showing up on the home page, which is awesome, but we'll need to fill in some of its properties. We can select it, then start by choosing an image for the logo. I'll drag one in here and select it. Then we can tweak the width to make it a more reasonable size. Next, I'll add a few links for 3 different pages: about, services, and our team. That's looking good now, but to prove that the navbar shows up on each page, let's create a new page for the about page. We'll name it about and update its path accordingly. You can see that the navbar shows up on this new page as well. Lastly, we can update the about link in the navbar to link to the newly created page. Now, we only did this for one of the pages, but you can imagine we would update each of those links to link to their appropriate pages as well. So that's how you build a visually editable navbar inside of Next.js using Makeswift. If you have ideas for other components that you'd like to learn how to build, let us know in the comments below.